What is organization? A noun, and when looked up on Merriam-Webster dictionary, it states the act or process of being organized, which is not too informative. So I took the liberty to look up organized, which is having a formal organization to coordinate and carry out activities. Hi, my name is Tyler Ochs. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC for short, is an example of a civil rights movement for which we can learn about nonviolence and how it is the most effective form of protesting. Martin Luther King Jr. is a major part in creating the SCLC, with efforts to nonviolently make a change for the duration of his life. First, Martin Luther King Jr., as well as others, peacefully fought for their place in society, leading to massive movements and protests. The SCLC was founded by ministers as a result of the American Civil Rights Movement and inequality for Black Americans after the freeing of slaves post-Civil War, but more specifically the Montgomery bus boycott. Since the 13th Amendment in 1865, African Americans under the Constitution were free, but socially and economically it was a different story. Treatment and beliefs of others, from someone on the street to state officials, led to racism, segregation, disenfranchisement, and socioeconomic differences. Due to the acceptable social standards that African Americans, as well as any colored individuals, had to endure, the MIA, or Montgomery Improvement Association, staged a 381-day boycott of the Montgomery, Alabama segregated bus system, which was the root of the SCLC, presented by the Civil Rights National Park Services. With discrimination, specifically the Jim Crow laws, Martin Luther King Jr., as well as many others, specifically ministers, band together with the efforts to bring an end to Black disenfranchisement and coordinate peaceful protest movements. Next, strategies and goals. The SCLC cornerstone of strategy was nonviolent mass action. To demonstrate that the goal was not revenge, but to strive for equality and equal rights. A prime example of nonviolent mass action was the Montgomery bus boycott, which was history's most dramatic and massive nonviolent protest. This was a signal to Black Americans to begin a new phase of long struggles, say by the National SCLC, the same group that was created back in 1967 with King. King, the president of the foundation, also understood the power of television and publicly presented his active nonviolence with efforts to present to the world his goals with sit-ins, protests, marches, and speeches. His most famous speech, I Have a Dream, with the key message that all people are created equal, and he proclaimed with confidence and power that he believed that it was the case for America in the future. Later, in 1967, expansion occurred. From a focus solely on equality in reference to African Americans and inequality due to the color of one's skin, to an additional focus on economic inequality as well. Finally, successes and failures alongside each step to where we are today. Since the beginning of the SCLC in 1957, many successes, from retaining nonviolence to being a pivotal step for successful marches, have occurred, while many failures also cover the path, from growing tensions with other organizations to a sudden drop in momentum in 1968 when King was assassinated. As with anything, there are successes and failures along the path to the goal. The overarching success that the SCLC is able to still fulfill is nonviolence. Since the beginning, nonviolence has been the goal with any task at hand. While staying peaceful throughout it all, March on Washington in 1963, Selma voting rights campaign, the March to Montgomery in 1965, have all been successful, as well as a vital part in the civil rights movement. But while struggles and hardships occur, with the very popular Eisenhower not able to run for another term, the SCLC was able to push enough African Americans to voting polls to make a big enough difference to have JFK elected with a minute margin. While the SCLC was successful, there are still failures. From rough starts to deadly endings, the SCLC started as a collection of 60 ministers in the South with a lack of money, but goals were set. One of the first mass action efforts was the Crusade for Citizenship. This was to get African Americans to the polls to submit votes and choose a leader that was able to represent all the people. Right off the bat, a problem erected itself. No money, no staff, and at first no office. This led to individuals individual effort being put in to achieve these goals. While events were set up with high attendance and enthusiasm, only a few voter applications showed up at the Deep South courthouses, with even fewer still managing to add their names to voter rolls, saved by the Civil Rights Movement archive created by the veterans of the Southern Freedom Movement from 1951 to 1968. Years later, while the SCLC and the Civil Rights Movement was fighting for equality and making a name for all of its people, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, destroying the momentum and undermining successes. Written by the Research and Education Institute of Stanford University. The SCLC has worked through several decades of change while still living off the true goal of achieving equal rights through nonviolence. With anything, there's a reason for your creation, whether it's to make a life easier or to fight for what is right. The startup is the first step. While starting an organization, goals are required, or failure is inevitable. The SCLC, from 1957, has been part of the Civil Rights Movement with the motive of nonviolence. While Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream, he also had a goal, which has been worked on decade after decade to make everyone's life just a little bit better.